The wasteland only gives you two choices, Ethan Cole once muttered to himself. Starve slowly, or stop caring. The wind screamed across the dead valley hard enough to shake the rusted frame of his crawler truck as it rolled over cracked red earth beneath a sky the color of burnt steel. Fine radioactive dust hissed against the windshield like dry ocean waves, coating the glass in layers of orange grit. The temperature outside had already dropped below 20 degrees, and night was still an hour away. Ethan adjusted the worn collar of his heavy canvas jacket and glanced at the fuel gauge blinking weakly on the dashboard. 9 miles left. Maybe 10 if the engine didn't die first. He reached beside him and picked up the last ration pack he owned. 1 pouch of protein broth. Half a stale nutrient bar wrapped in silver foil. That was all he had left after 3 weeks crossing Sector 12 alone. His stomach twisted at the smell as he tore the packet open. Warm, artificial beef. Too salty. Too thin. But food was food. Out here, that made it sacred. Ethan lifted the pouch toward his mouth when the crawler's motion sensor suddenly clicked once. Then again. He froze. The storm outside howled louder. Most people ignored sounds in the wasteland. Curiosity got you killed faster than hunger ever could. But then he heard it. A voice. Weak. Barely more than a breath beneath the static of the wind. Please. Ethan slowly lowered the ration pouch. For a moment he thought exhaustion was finally getting to him. 36 years old. Too many miles. Too many graves behind him. He rubbed a hand across his tired face and looked through the cracked windshield again. Nothing but dunes of red dust and broken machinery scattered like bones across the valley floor. Then the voice came again. Softer this time. Please, don't leave me. Ethan cursed under his breath and shoved the crawler door open. Freezing air slammed into him instantly, carrying sharp grains of radioactive sand that stung against his skin. His boots sank several inches into the dust as he stepped down beside the crawler, old metal creaking behind him. The storm blurred everything beyond 20 feet. Ethan pulled a flashlight from his belt and swept the beam across the wasteland. Broken antenna towers. Half-buried engine parts. The skeletal remains of some transport ship destroyed years ago. Then the light stopped. A hand. Blue. Barely visible beneath the drifting sand. Ethan's pulse tightened. He moved fast, dropping to one knee beside the wreckage. The figure buried there was a woman. Alien. Tall, even curled against the metal debris. Her pale blue skin was covered in dust and faint silver markings that shimmered weakly under the flashlight beam. Long white hair spilled across the sand like frozen silk. Her breathing sounded shallow. Fragile. One side of her dark travel suit had been scorched by radiation exposure, and dried blood stained the fabric near her shoulder. But it was her eyes that caught him. Bright gold. Terrified. Still fighting to stay alive. The alien woman flinched when Ethan reached toward her. Her trembling fingers instantly grabbed the handle of a broken plasma blade lying half-buried beside her body. The weapon sparked weakly once before dying again. Ethan stared at her for a second, then at the blade, then back at her exhausted face. Easy, he said quietly. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't be standing out here freezing with you. The woman tried to lift the weapon anyway. Her arm barely moved an inch before collapsing into the sand. Ethan noticed the cracks on her lips immediately. Severe dehydration. Starvation too. She hadn't eaten in days. Maybe longer. Slowly, Ethan looked down at the warm ration pouch still hanging from his hand. Then back at her. The wind roared around them, while the alien woman watched him with fading golden eyes full of fear and suspicion. Ethan exhaled once through his nose, then silently tore the nutrient bar in half. The alien woman stared at the broken piece of nutrient bar in Ethan's gloved hand as though it frightened her more than the storm itself. The wind pushed red dust across the wreckage in slow waves while the weak flashlight beam trembled between them. Ethan could hear the old crawler engine ticking behind him as it cooled in the freezing air. 10 minutes out here, maybe less, before the storm got worse. Take it, he said quietly. You need food. Her golden eyes narrowed instantly. Even exhausted, there was intelligence in them. Pride too. She looked from the nutrient bar to his face as if trying to understand a language her translator could not process. Why? She whispered. Ethan blinked once. Because you are starving. The alien woman slowly shook her head. No human shares final rations without purpose. Ethan almost laughed at that, but the sound died in his throat when her body trembled violently from the cold. She was not acting. Whatever strength had kept her alive this long was disappearing fast. He crouched lower and held the food closer. Lady, trust me. There is no hidden contract here. Her breathing became uneven. You do not understand. Ethan glanced toward the darkening horizon. The storm clouds above Sector 12 rolled like black ocean waves beneath flashes of distant lightning. Night was coming fast now. Out here, darkness turned the wasteland into a graveyard. You can explain later, he muttered. Right now you need calories. For several seconds, she did not move. Then, slowly, the alien woman released the broken plasma blade from her shaking fingers. The dead weapon slipped into the dust beside her. Ethan noticed the surrender immediately. Not weakness. Choice. Carefully, she reached toward the nutrient bar. Her pale blue hand stopped halfway there, trembling hard enough that she could barely keep it raised. Ethan finally sighed and pressed the food gently into her palm himself. The moment his fingers touched her freezing skin, her eyes widened. Not with fear. Something deeper. Something almost painful. Ethan frowned slightly, but said nothing. The alien woman stared at the food in silence before taking the smallest bite imaginable. Then another. Her body reacted instantly. He could practically see her trying not to devour it too quickly. Hunger had hollowed her out from the inside. Ethan opened the warm broth pouch and handed it over next. Steam rose faintly into the freezing air. Slow, he warned. Your stomach will fight you if you rush it. She obeyed without argument now, sipping carefully while the storm screamed around the wreckage. For a while neither of them spoke. The silence felt strangely heavy. Not awkward, just tired. Two survivors sitting in the dust at the edge of nowhere. Ethan leaned back slightly against twisted metal debris and studied her more carefully beneath the flashlight glow. She was taller than most humans, even curled defensively against the wreckage. Silver markings traced faint patterns along her neck and wrists like living light beneath her skin. Noble-born, maybe. Or military. Hard to tell anymore. The galaxy had fallen apart years ago. Rank meant less than water now. What happened to your ship? He finally asked. Her golden eyes lowered toward the buried wreck beside her. They found us. Ethan noticed she said us, not me. Raiders. A long pause. Hunters. Something in her voice made Ethan stop asking questions. He had heard that tone before from people who survived things they could not explain without reliving them. The storm suddenly howled louder, rattling loose metal around the crash site. Ethan looked toward the horizon again and swore softly beneath his breath. Visibility was dropping fast. Another hour out here, and both of them would freeze solid. He stood slowly and extended a hand toward her. Can you walk? The alien woman looked at his hand for several seconds before answering. I can try. Ethan nodded once. Good. Because if we stay out here tonight, the wasteland is going to bury both of us by morning. The storm swallowed the wreck behind them within minutes. Ethan kept one hand on the crawler's side rail, while the other steadied the alien woman as they pushed through knee-high drifts of radioactive dust. The wind hit hard enough to force them sideways every few steps. Red sand scraped against Ethan's goggles with a sound like grinding metal. Beside him, the woman moved carefully, her breathing uneven beneath the howl of the storm. Twice she nearly collapsed. Twice Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. Neither of them mentioned it. The crawler's floodlights barely cut through the darkness now. Long shadows twisted across the wasteland while distant lightning flashed beneath thick clouds overhead. Ethan finally reached the passenger door and pulled it open with a sharp groan of old hydraulics. Warm air rolled out from inside along with the faint smell of machine oil and overheated wiring. Get in, he said. The alien woman froze beside the open door. Her golden eyes scanned the crawler interior cautiously. The old vehicle looked more like a moving scrapyard than transportation. Loose cables hung from the ceiling. Emergency blankets were piled beside crates of spare engine parts. A cracked navigation screen blinked weakly across the dashboard. Everything smelled worn. Human. Safe. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat first and reached across to switch on the interior heater. The machine rattled violently before weak warmth finally began flowing through the vents. It is not much, he admitted, but it beats freezing outside. The woman slowly stepped into the crawler. Even exhausted, she moved with strange natural grace, like someone raised far away from places like this. Ethan noticed the hesitation in her expression as she lowered herself into the passenger seat. Her eyes kept drifting toward him, studying him, measuring something he could not see. Ethan pulled the heavy door shut, sealing the storm outside in an instant. Silence filled the crawler except for the low hum of the engine and the ticking of loose metal somewhere beneath the floorboards. For the first time since finding her, Ethan got a clear look at her face beneath the dim dashboard lights. She looked younger sitting there. Not weak exactly, just worn down by fear and exhaustion. Strands of silver-white hair clung to her pale blue skin, while faint glowing markings traced slowly beneath her neck like embers under ice. She caught him looking and straightened immediately. Pride again. Ethan recognized it. Some people would rather die than appear helpless. "You got a name?" he asked while adjusting the heat controls. A long pause followed. Then finally, "Lyra." Ethan nodded once. "Ethan." She repeated the name quietly, almost testing the sound of it. "Ethan." Something about hearing his name in her soft voice made the cramped crawler suddenly feel smaller. Ethan cleared his throat and focused on the dashboard instead. "There is an old communications bunker about 6 miles east of here," he said. "If it still has power, we can ride the storm out there." Lyra's eyes lowered slowly toward the empty ration wrapper resting near the center console. Her expression changed instantly. Not fear. Something heavier. "You should not have shared your final meal with me." Ethan sighed tiredly. It was half a nutrient bar, not a marriage proposal. The moment the words left his mouth, Lyra became completely still. Even the faint movement in her breathing seemed to stop. Ethan finally glanced toward her again and frowned. "What?" Her golden eyes locked onto him with painful seriousness. "Among my people," she said softly, "to share survival food during death conditions is the oldest vow that exists." Ethan blinked once. "What kind of vow?" The storm roared against the crawler walls outside. Lyra lowered her gaze slowly to the empty ration wrapper between them. "A bonding vow." Ethan stared at her for 2 full seconds before letting out a short, exhausted laugh. "Well, that is convenient," he muttered, starting the crawler engine again. "Because where I come from, it just means somebody was hungry." But Lyra did not laugh. She only looked out into the storm-dark wasteland ahead, while her trembling fingers quietly pressed against the silver wrapper he had handed her. The crawler pushed through the storm like an exhausted animal refusing to die. Its massive wheels groaned against shifting dunes while red dust hammered the metal frame hard enough to make the entire cabin vibrate. Ethan kept both hands tight on the steering controls, eyes fixed on the dim scanner display flickering across the dashboard. Half the navigation system was dead again. Typical. He tapped the cracked monitor with his knuckles until the radar pulse stabilized for another few seconds. Beside him, Lyra sat quietly wrapped in one of the crawler's old thermal blankets. The silver material looked strange around her tall frame, almost too human against her pale blue skin. She had stopped trembling from the cold at least, though exhaustion still clung to her face like a shadow. Ethan noticed she had barely blinked in the last 10 minutes. She kept watching him instead. Watching everything. The way he drove. The way he adjusted power levels manually to conserve fuel. The way he instinctively checked the side mirrors every few seconds despite there being nothing alive for miles. Survivors learned habits that never left them. "You are expecting pursuit," Lyra said softly at last. Ethan shrugged without looking away from the windshield. "In the wasteland, assuming nobody is chasing you is how people disappear." A faint flicker crossed her expression. Not amusement exactly. Recognition. "You speak as though this world wounded you personally." Ethan let out a tired breath through his nose. "Lady, this world has been trying to kill me since I was 16. Silence settled again after that. The crawler's heater rattled weakly while soft orange light from the dashboard reflected across Lyra's face. Outside, the storm swallowed everything beyond 30 feet. The wasteland looked endless at night. Just darkness and dust stretching forever beneath dead stars. Ethan finally spotted the communications bunker nearly 20 minutes later. A concrete structure half buried beneath the dunes, barely visible through the storm. One broken transmission tower leaned crookedly beside it like a dying skeleton. "There," he muttered. Relief loosened something inside his chest immediately. Shelter. Maybe power too if the old reactor still worked. Ethan guided the crawler down the slope carefully until the heavy tires crunched against cracked pavement hidden beneath the sand. The bunker entrance came into view through the blowing dust. Massive steel doors sealed shut decades ago. One side hung partially open now, leaving just enough space for a person to slip through. Ethan killed the engine. Silence hit hard after hours of mechanical noise. Only the wind remained. Low. Endless. He reached beneath the seat and grabbed an old shotgun before pulling on his gloves again. Lyra watched the weapon carefully, but said nothing. Stay behind me, Ethan said. If scavengers moved in here recently, I do not want surprises. She tilted her head slightly. You assume I need protection. Ethan finally looked at her directly. You could barely stand an hour ago. Her eyes narrowed immediately. Tried again. I survived before you arrived, human. Barely. Ethan replied quietly. That answer seemed to strike harder than anger would have. Lyra looked away first. Ethan climbed out into the storm and immediately felt the freezing wind claw through his jacket again. Sand hissed across the crawler lights while he approached the bunker entrance carefully, boots crunching over layers of dust and old debris. The inside smelled stale. Cold metal. Ancient wiring. Dead air trapped underground for years. Ethan swept his flashlight across the darkness. Rusted control panels lined the walls beside collapsed shelves and old emergency lockers. No movement. No heat signatures either. Good. Looks clear, he called back. Lyra stepped inside slowly, her silver-white hair catching the flashlight beam like moonlight. The heavy bunker door groaned loudly as Ethan forced it mostly shut behind them, muting the storm outside into a distant roar. Then he froze. A faint orange light flickered somewhere deeper inside the bunker. Not lightning. Not reflection. Power. Ethan frowned slowly toward the dark hallway ahead, while old machinery hummed somewhere beneath the floor. Well, he muttered under his breath, tightening his grip on the shotgun slightly. That is either very good news or exactly the opposite. The faint orange light pulsed again somewhere deep inside the bunker, soft and uneven like a dying heartbeat beneath the floor. Ethan stood motionless near the entrance, listening carefully while cold air drifted through the narrow crack in the steel door behind them. Old buildings made sounds. Pipes shifted. Loose metal groaned. But this was different. Rhythmic. Mechanical. Alive. Lyra stepped closer beside him, her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Someone is here, she whispered. Ethan slowly shook his head. Maybe. He swept the flashlight down the corridor again. Dust floated through the beam in slow silver clouds. The bunker looked ancient. Emergency signs hung crooked on cracked walls while abandoned storage crates sat scattered along the hallway floor. Whatever this place used to be, people had left in a hurry. Ethan moved carefully forward, shotgun lowered but ready. Lyra followed several feet behind him without speaking. The deeper they walked, the warmer the air became. Not comfortable warmth. Reactor warmth. Dry and metallic. Ethan finally reached a heavy security door hanging partially open near the end of the corridor. Orange lights spilled through the gap along with the soft hum of old machinery. He pushed the door wider slowly. The room beyond looked like a forgotten command center buried beneath the wasteland. Ancient monitors flickered weakly across rusted control panels, while emergency lights glowed dim orange overhead. In the center of the room, an old fusion generator still operated behind reinforced glass, its core pulsing softly beneath layers of dust. Ethan let out a quiet breath. Well, I will be damned. Lyra stared at the machine in silence. How is it still functioning? Ethan stepped toward the control console carefully, brushing dust away from the nearest screen with his sleeve. Military-grade backup reactor, he muttered. Some of these old systems were built to outlive governments. The monitor flickered weakly beneath his hand. Low power warnings covered the display, but the generator still held enough energy to maintain heat and basic lighting. Barely. Ethan smiled for the first time all day. Shelter. Warmth. Maybe clean water too if the filtration system still worked. Out in the wasteland, that counted as luxury. He slung the shotgun across his shoulder and moved toward a rusted utility locker against the far wall. Stay put for a minute, he said. Lyra immediately stiffened. You think I cannot defend myself? Ethan opened the locker with a loud metallic screech. Right now I think you need to sit down before your legs stop listening to you again. She opened her mouth to argue, but suddenly caught herself against the wall instead. Her face tightened briefly. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. That answers that question. He pulled an old emergency med kit from the locker along with 2 thermal blankets and a portable lantern. Most of the supplies inside the kit had expired years ago, but basic antiseptic and burn patches. Still worked. Usually. Ethan carried the supplies over toward an old bench beneath the reactor lights and motioned for Lyra to sit. She hesitated before lowering herself carefully onto the metal seat. The orange glow from the generator softened the sharp lines of exhaustion across her face. For the first time since meeting her, Ethan noticed how young she actually looked beneath all the fear and dust. Not fragile, just tired in a way sleep alone could not fix. He crouched in front of her and opened the med kit. "Show me your arm." Her golden eyes narrowed instantly. "Why?" "Because that burn on your shoulder is starting to discolor. I will heal." Ethan looked up at her flatly. "Eventually. Maybe." Meanwhile, infection would kill both of us in a sealed bunker. Lyra watched him silently for several seconds before slowly pulling the damaged section of her travel suit aside near her shoulder. Ethan kept his eyes focused only on the injury itself. Radiation exposure. Minor tissue burn. Nothing fatal yet. He cleaned the wound carefully while the old generator hummed softly around them. Lyra barely reacted to the pain. Ethan noticed that too. People who survived long enough out here stopped reacting to discomfort eventually. The silence between them grew strangely calm. No more suspicion. No more fear. Just the sound of breathing and distant machinery beneath warm orange light. Then Lyra spoke quietly without looking at him. "You still do not understand what you have done, Ethan." He pressed the final medical patch into place and leaned back slightly. "Fed somebody who needed help?" Her glowing eyes lifted toward his slowly. "No," she whispered. "You gave your last meal to someone your world taught you to fear." The old bunker settled into silence as the storm raged somewhere far above them. Dust drifted lazily through the orange reactor light, while ancient ventilation fans pushed warm air through rusted ceiling vents with a soft mechanical hum. Ethan sat on the floor beside the command console, one knee raised, carefully cleaning sand from the crawler's navigation chip with a stained cloth. Across the room, Lyra remained seated on the metal bench wrapped in the silver thermal blanket, watching him with quiet intensity. Neither of them had spoken for several minutes. Somehow the silence no longer felt uncomfortable. Ethan finally slid the navigation chip back into place and sighed. "If the storm dies by morning, we can reach the southern trade route in 2 days." Lyra lowered her eyes slightly. "You still intend to leave me there?" Ethan frowned at the question. That was the plan. Her fingers tightened faintly around the blanket. Even after the vow, Ethan leaned his head back against the cold wall behind him. "Lyra, where I come from, sharing food means somebody did not want another person starving to death. That is because humans survive alone," she answered softly. "My people survive by binding themselves together." Ethan looked over at her quietly. The orange reactor light reflected in her golden eyes now, making them glow like embers beneath the dim bunker shadows. "Then explain it to me," he said at last. "The real version." Lyra stayed silent for several seconds before speaking again. "Thousands of years ago, before my people built cities, the wastelands of our homeworld killed millions every winter. Food was rare. Water was sacred. Families survived by rationing every mouthful." Her voice remained calm, but Ethan noticed the faint tremor beneath it. Not fear. Memory. When someone offered part of their final meal to another person during death conditions, it became more than kindness. It meant this life and the next would no longer be faced alone. Ethan listened quietly while the reactor hummed behind them. "So your people turned survival into marriage?" Lyra slowly shook her head. "No. Into trust." That answer lingered in the room for a long moment. Ethan stared down at his hands thoughtfully. Out in the wasteland, trust had become rarer than food years ago. Most people traded loyalty for batteries and water filters now. Entire settlements collapsed because neighbors stopped believing in each other. He glanced toward Lyra again. "You really believe one shared meal means all that?" Her expression softened for the first time since he met her. "I believe intentions matter." Ethan almost smiled at that. "Good thing my intentions were just keeping somebody alive." "That is precisely why it matters," she whispered. The old bunker lights flickered suddenly overhead. Both of them looked up instinctively. A low warning tone echoed briefly through the command center before fading again. Ethan stood immediately and crossed toward the reactor console. Power levels had dropped another 3%. Not good. The generator was dying slowly. "Come on," he muttered under his breath while typing commands into the dusty control panel. "Stay alive a little longer." Lyra watched him carefully from across the room. You speak to machines often. Machines are honest, Ethan replied. If they are failing, they tell you. A faint smile touched her face then. Small, tired, real. Ethan noticed it immediately. Strange how different she looked when fear was not controlling every expression. Less like a hunted survivor, more like an actual person. He looked away before she caught him staring. Outside, the storm roared against the buried bunker walls while the old reactor continued pulsing weakly beneath the floor. Warm light filled the command center in soft, orange waves. For the first time in years, Ethan realized he was no longer sitting alone in the dark listening to dead machines breathe. Then the bunker's motion alarm suddenly activated. One sharp metallic beep echoed across the room. Ethan froze instantly. Another beep followed. Slow, rhythmic. Something was moving outside. The motion alarm beeped again. Slow, deliberate. Ethan's entire posture changed instantly. 1 second, he had been standing beside the reactor console. The next, he already had the shotgun in his hands and his eyes fixed on the bunker entrance monitor mounted near the far wall. Static flickered across the cracked screen before resolving into grainy shapes moving through the storm outside. 3 figures. Maybe 4. Hard to tell through the dust. Ethan swore quietly under his breath. Stay here. Lyra stood immediately despite the exhaustion still visible in her movements. They found me. Ethan crossed toward the security monitor without answering. The figures outside moved with purpose, sweeping lights across the buried bunker entrance while the storm curled around them like smoke. Hunters, not scavengers. Scavengers wandered. These people searched. Ethan adjusted the monitor frequency until distorted audio crackled through the old speaker system. Heat signature confirmed. She is inside. Alive, bone is still active. Lyra closed her eyes briefly. Not panic. Recognition. Ethan glanced toward her. Friends of yours? Her voice sounded hollow now. No. The answer carried enough history behind it that Ethan stopped asking. He studied the screen again instead. The hunters wore desert survival armor with external oxygen rigs and long-range scanners mounted to their shoulders. Professional equipment. Expensive too. Nobody spent that kind of money chasing ordinary people across radioactive wastelands. Ethan finally looked back toward Lyra carefully. Who exactly are you? Silence filled the bunker for several long seconds while old machinery hummed beneath the floor. Then Lyra stepped closer into the orange reactor light. The glowing silver markings beneath her skin looked brighter now somehow, almost alive beneath the warmth. My full name is Lyra Vane Tallery, she said quietly. Ethan frowned slightly. The name sounded familiar. Not from personal memory. From somewhere deeper. Old broadcasts maybe. Stories from before the trade routes collapsed. Lyra lowered her eyes briefly before continuing. My family once governed the eastern systems beyond the wastelands. Ethan stared at her. You are joking. I wish I were. Outside, another distorted voice crackled through the bunker speakers. Open the bunker and surrender the target peacefully. Ethan let out a tired breath and rubbed one hand across his jaw. Of course you are royalty, he muttered. Because apparently the wasteland finally got bored trying to kill normal people. Lyra did not smile this time. My house fell 3 years ago. Most of my family died during the civil fractures. Ethan looked back toward the monitor screen. And the survivors? A faint tremor crossed her voice. Hunted. The room fell quiet again except for the soft warning beeps echoing from the motion tracker. Ethan understood enough. Now, a fallen noble house. Political collapse. Bounties. The galaxy had always eaten its own eventually. He checked the bunker's external security feed one more time. For hunters now. One setting up something near the entrance. Probably breach equipment. Wonderful. Lyra stepped closer behind him. If you surrender me, they will reward you heavily. Ethan said nothing. Enough credits to leave the wasteland forever, she continued softly. Enough to buy safety. That part hit harder than she realized. Ethan looked down at the rusted shotgun in his hands. Safety. He barely remembered what that word felt like anymore. No more starving settlements. No more broken engines dying in the middle of nowhere. No more sleeping with one eye open waiting for raiders, or storms, or hunger. Just peace. The bunker lights flickered weakly overhead again. Ethan stared at the monitor silently while snow-like dust drifted across the security feed outside. Then he finally reached forward and shut the speaker system off completely. Silence returned instantly. Lyra watched him carefully. Ethan, he turned toward her at last. You know what the funny thing is? He said quietly. 5 hours ago, I was alone eating expired soup in a dying truck. He checked the shotgun chamber calmly before slinging the weapon over his shoulder. Now suddenly everybody in the Wasteland wants something from me. Lyra's glowing eyes searched his face carefully. What are you going to do? Ethan walked toward the bunker entrance controls without hesitation. What humans usually do when somebody threatens a guest under their roof. Then for the first time since she met him, Lyra looked genuinely afraid for someone other than herself. The old bunker trembled softly as something heavy struck the outer entrance door above them. Dust drifted from the ceiling in thin gray streams, while warning lights blinked weakly across the command center walls. Ethan stood near the security controls listening carefully, one hand resting on the shotgun strapped across his back. Another impact echoed through the structure. Closer this time. Lyra stepped toward him immediately. They will force entry soon. Ethan nodded once. Probably. His calmness seemed to unsettle her more than the danger itself. Most people panicked when cornered. Ethan only looked tired. He checked the reactor readings again before shutting the console panel. Power continued dropping steadily. The bunker would not survive much longer if the system's overloaded. There is another way out, Lyra said suddenly. Ethan looked toward her. You know this bunker? No, she answered softly. But military shelters always have emergency escape tunnels. Ethan considered that for a second. She was probably right. Old war infrastructure loved backup exits. Problem was finding one before the hunters breached the entrance. Another metallic boom rolled through the bunker overhead. Lyra flinched at the sound despite herself. Ethan noticed immediately. Fear looked strange on someone who had spent hours pretending not to feel it. Hey, he said quietly. Breathe. Her glowing eyes lifted toward him. You do not understand what they will do if they take me. Ethan held her gaze for a long moment beneath the orange reactor light. Maybe not, he admitted. But I understand enough. Lyra stared at him in silence. The old ventilation fans hummed around them while the storm continued roaring far above the buried bunker. Ethan suddenly realized how close she was standing now. Close enough that he could see faint silver reflections moving beneath her skin like light beneath frozen water. Exhaustion still lingered across her face, but something else had replaced the fear slowly growing in her expression. Trust. Careful. Fragile. Real. Ethan looked away first and crouched beside an old floor panel near the reactor controls. Help me move this. Together they pulled the rusted metal cover aside with a loud scrape. Beneath it, a narrow maintenance shaft disappeared into darkness below. Cold air drifted upward carrying the smell of old machinery and dry concrete. Ethan exhaled softly. Guess you were right. Lyra knelt beside the opening carefully, her silver-white hair falling across one shoulder as she looked into the darkness below. The tunnel should lead beyond the outer perimeter. Another impact shook the bunker violently overhead. This time the emergency lights flickered almost completely out before stabilizing again. Ethan looked toward the entrance corridor. Not much time left now. He turned back toward Lyra. You go first. She blinked in surprise. You are coming with me? Ethan almost laughed at that. Lady, after all this, abandoning you now would feel rude. Her expression changed instantly. Not relief exactly. Something deeper. Something that hurt to see because Ethan realized how long it had probably been since anyone chose her over survival. Lyra's voice lowered almost to a whisper. Why are humans like this? Ethan leaned against the reactor console beside the open tunnel shaft and gave a tired shrug. Most of us are not. Silence filled the room again. Soft. Heavy. Then Lyra stepped closer until only inches separated them beneath the dim orange lights. Her golden eyes searched his face carefully as though trying to memorize something. Among my people, she said quietly, sharing your final meal during death conditions means your souls survive together. Ethan said nothing this time. He only listened. It is older than royalty, she continued softly. Older than our oldest cities. It means one life no longer walks alone into darkness. The bunker shook again overhead. Dust rained softly from the ceiling. Still Lyra never looked away from him. You gave that vow freely without understanding it, she whispered. And somehow that makes it more sacred. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but Lyra gently placed one trembling hand against his chest first. Warm. Careful, human enough to hurt. Her voice broke slightly when she finally spoke again. You fed me when death had already chosen me. Her glowing eyes softened beneath the reactor light. You are my husband forever. The bunker lights died completely 3 minutes later. Darkness swallowed the command center except for the weak red glow of emergency strips along the floor and the distant pulse of the failing reactor beneath the walls. Somewhere above them, metal screamed as the outer entrance finally gave way. Ethan did not wait to hear more. Move, he said quietly. Lyra disappeared into the maintenance shaft first while Ethan secured the panel loosely back into place behind them. The narrow tunnel smelled of rust, dust, and ancient coolant lines untouched for decades. Their flashlight beams cut thin paths through the darkness as they climbed downward through old maintenance ladders and half-collapsed service corridors. The storm outside became quieter the deeper they moved underground until only the sound of breathing and distant machinery remained. Ethan stayed behind Lyra the entire time, one hand keeping the flashlight steady while the other rested near the shotgun across his back. Not because he expected danger anymore. Habit. Survivors carried habits like scars. After nearly 20 minutes, the tunnel finally sloped upward again. Cold air drifted through cracks ahead, carrying the sharp scent of sand and snow. Ethan pushed aside a rusted emergency hatch and climbed out first. Dawn had arrived. Pale silver light stretched across the wasteland beneath a sky slowly clearing after the storm. Endless dunes rolled toward the horizon, while broken ruins cast long shadows across the frozen earth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt almost sacred after hours underground. Ethan looked back toward the buried bunker in the distance. Thin trails of smoke curled into the morning air from somewhere beneath the sand. The hunters would eventually realize the tunnel existed. By then, Ethan planned to be far away. He adjusted the straps on his weathered supply pack and glanced toward Lyra. She stood beside the hatch quietly, silver-white hair moving softly in the cold morning wind. The exhaustion remained in her face, but something else had changed now too. She no longer looked hunted. The southern trade route is east, Ethan said after a while. There is a settlement about 40 miles from here. Safe enough if you keep your head down. Lyra watched him carefully. And after that, Ethan shrugged lightly. After that you disappear, somewhere people stop trying to kill you. Her golden eyes lowered for a moment. You speak as though you are not coming. Ethan looked out across the wasteland instead of answering immediately. The morning light reflected across the endless dunes like a dead ocean made from rust and ash. He had spent years wandering places like this alone. One broken settlement after another. One dying machine after another. Somewhere along the way, he stopped expecting anything different. Then he heard himself speak before he fully thought about the words. Truth is, he said quietly, I do not really have anywhere else to go. Lyra looked at him for a long moment beneath the pale sunrise. Then, slowly, she stepped closer until their shoulders almost touched. No grand speech followed. No dramatic promise. Just quiet understanding standing beneath dying stars. Ethan started walking first, boots crunching softly against frozen dust. After a few seconds, he noticed Lyra matching his pace beside him. The wind moved gently across the wasteland now, carrying away the last traces of the storm. Somewhere far behind them, old hunters searched through dead ruins for ghosts they no longer understood. Ahead, the horizon stretched endless and uncertain beneath cold morning light. Ethan felt Lyra's hand brush against his once by accident as they walked. Then her fingers remained there quietly beside his. Warm despite the cold. Neither of them mentioned it. They simply kept moving forward together across the empty world while dawn slowly painted silver light across the wasteland around them. And for the first time in years, Ethan no longer felt alone beneath the stars.